We all know the iconic image, right?
Mm.
You picture a cartoon duck wearing a top hat and spats, and he's joyfully swan diving into this massive, glittering swimming pool.
Filled entirely with gold coins.
Exactly, filled with gold coins. It is an image that is practically burned into our collective cultural consciousness.
Mm.
But what if I told you that the story behind that duck is actually this sprawling, centuries-long family epic that rivals the history of real-world royal dynasties?
It sounds absurd, but it is completely true.
It is. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking a fascinating journey for you. We're exploring a remarkably comprehensive, heavily detailed 30-page Wikipedia article all about the Clan McDuck.
And it is so great to be here to look into this with you today. I have to say, your curiosity about this topic, it's entirely justified. Because this isn't just, an exercise in Saturday morning cartoon trivia.
Right, it's so much more than that.
It really is. What we're really looking at today is a phenomenal case study in collaborative world building, the complexities of generational wealth, and honestly, the psychology of money.
Yeah, the psychology of money is a huge part of it. So the mission of our deep docs today is to explore how a handful of essentially throwaway gag comic books were meticulously reverse engineered over decades into this incredibly dense, epic mythology.
Which is no small feat.
Not at all. And to understand how that happened, we really have to start with the architects of this universe. First, there's Carl Barks. Back in 1948, he wrote a comic called The Old Castle's Secret.
Right.
He needed a treasure hunt narrative for the issue, so he essentially just invented a Scottish ancestry for his rich duck character on the fly. He created a castle, sketched out a few ancestors, and that was supposed to be the end of it.
Yeah, it was just a vehicle for a single story. But Carl Barks kept writing these comics for decades, and he would casually drop these little biographical hints along the way.
Just little seeds here and there.
Exactly. Fast forward to the late 1980s and early 90s, and we get a writer and artist named Don Rosa. Now, he was a massive fan of Barks, and he took on this incredibly ambitious project for his publisher. He scoured every single comic Barks ever wrote.
Every single one.
Every one. He extracted every offhand mention of the past, which he lovingly dubbed Barksian facts, and he wove them all together into a massive 12-part epic called The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck.
And what I absolutely love about Don Rosa is his humility in all of this. He actually wrote an introduction stressing that this was just his personal telling of the character's life.
Yes.
He wasn't trying to force an absolute rigid canon on everyone else who might want to write a story in that universe.
Which is exactly how real human myths work. They evolve over time. Different storytellers take the established lore, they add their own interpretations, and the tapestry just gets richer and richer. Rosa recognized that he was playing in a sandbox, but he treated the sand with an immense amount of historical respect.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the ancestral home itself, because the setting really dictates the entire vibe of this family.
It sets the stage perfectly.
It really does. We are going to a place called Dismal Downs. It's located in Rannoch Moor, which is a real, actual moorland in north-central Scotland. And sitting right there in the fog is Castle McDuck. But even the origin of the castle itself has these conflicting legends depending on which part of the lore you look at.
Yes, the architectural history perfectly encapsulates the clan's entire ethos. In the original comics continuity, the castle has been there since at least the year 946 when it was under siege by the Saxons. It served as the imposing home of the clan chief for centuries.
But then there's another continuity from the animated series that claims the castle was built much later, roughly in the 18th century, by a great-great-grandfather named Silas McDuck.
Yeah.
And why did Silas build it where he did?
Oh, this is the best part.
Because he found an existing Druid stone circle and decided to just build right on top of it to save money on construction costs.
Which naturally brought a curse upon the family. But whether it's an ancient 10th century fortress or a cheapskate's 18th century real estate blunder, the castle serves as the stage for a family history defined by a very specific, repeating pattern of ruin.
Pattern of ruin is the perfect way to phrase it, because as you look through the historical ancestors, it is just this tragic parade of people who sabotaged their own lives.
Yeah, it really is.
Let's run through a few of the greats. Going back to that Saxon siege in 946, we have Sir Eider McDuck. He was the chief of the clan. He ends up perishing during the siege because his own serfs abandoned him.
And you have to look at the exact numbers here to understand the absurdity of it. Sir Eider was paying his serfs 30 copper pieces an hour to fight for him, but he was far too cheap to actually purchase arrows for their bows.
He hired an army but wouldn't buy them ammunition.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you jump to 1066 and you meet Sir Murdoch McDuck. Now, initially, he sounds like a brilliant businessman. He actually patents the longbow. When the Normans invade England, he gets them to sign a lucrative contract to buy his weapons.
Yeah.
Genius, right?
I wouldn't call it genius. I'd call it incredibly short-sighted. Patenting a weapon is smart. But Murdoch completely sabotaged the deal by not giving the invading army enough arrows, simply because he was trying to charge extra for the ammunition.
So he just repeats the mistake.
Right. He modernized the family name from McDouch to McDuck, but he couldn't modernize his own ethics to prioritize survival over a quick upcharge.
And the hits just keep coming. We have Sir Roast McDuck in 1189. At this point, the clan is actually one of the wealthiest in all of Scotland. But Roast decides to offer a massive chunk of their wealth to King William the Lion to help pay a national tribute.
And it completely bankrupts the clan's finances.
Completely bankrupts them. And Sir Roast's ultimate fate. In 1205, he raids the king's pantry and literally devours himself into an early grave. His memorial suit of armor in the castle even holds a knife and a fork.
It's so dark. And we cannot forget Sir Swampole McDuck in 1220.
Oh, Swampole is a perfect example of this family's logic.
Exactly. Sir Swampole decided to permanently seal the castle dungeons. He claimed it was a strategic move to decrease maintenance costs, but in reality, he was just using the dungeons to secretly hoard treasure away from everyone else.
He just locked it all away.
Yes, and his paranoia was so deep that after he passed, his skeleton was placed inside his memorial suit of armor right there in the castle halls.
What's amazing to me is how you'd think, after losing their clan chief to sheer cheapness in the 10th century, the family would learn a lesson. But instead, they just keep pivoting from one extreme to another.
What's fascinating here is how the writers are using comedy to explore some very heavy thematic ground. If you look closely at these ancestors, they aren't just funny cartoon ducks. They are embodiments of fatal human flaws.
Right.
We see pathological cheapness in Eider, unhinged greed in Murdoch, literal gluttony in Roast, and paranoid hoarding in Swampole. The writers are showing us that wealth isn't just something you accumulate. It is a mirror that exposes your deepest psychological weaknesses.
Wow, yeah.
The family fortune is constantly being wiped out, not by external forces, but by their own internal shortcomings. It really makes you think about how family traits and even family traumas echo through the generations. Think about your own family tree for a moment. You've probably noticed certain quirks or stubborn habits that just seem to get passed down century after century.
Yeah, that is so true. And that generational echo continues as the clan starts bumping up against actual documented world history. We move out of the Dark Ages and meet Black Donald McDuck in 1440. He supposedly invents the sports of the hammer throw, the caber toss, and golf.
Yes, golf.
But he had such a notoriously foul temper that King James II actually had the sport of golf outlawed.
It's a wonderful blending of fiction and reality. Barks and Rosa love dropping the McDucks into the middle of real historical events, which forces the reader to anchor the absurdity to something tangible.
It grounds the fantasy completely. And speaking of grounding the fantasy, we have to talk about the era of global sea roads. This brings us to Captain Hugh McDuck in 1727, better known as Seafoam.
Ah, Seafoam.
He gets into the merchant trade with a ship called the Golden Goose. In 1753, he signs a contract with a character named Swindle McSue to deliver a massive cargo of horseradish to Jamaica. But Swindle sabotages the ship. It sinks.
And of course, there's fine print.
There's always fine print. Because of the contract, Seafoam forfeits every last penny and possession he has to Swindle McSue. Seafoam escapes with only the clothes on his back, a silver pocket watch, and his golden dentures.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Seafoam's story is the crucial pivot point for the entire McDuck mythology. You have to combine Seafoam's financial ruin with another major event from 75 years prior. In 1675, the clan was permanently chased out of Dismal Downs and Castle McDuck.
Hey, to the dog, right.
Yes, they were terrorized by a monstrous devil dog, which actually turned out to be a devious plot by a rival family, Clan Whiskerville.
Imagine losing your entire ancestral home to a fake ghost dog.
It's humiliating. So they lose their ancestral lands in the 17th century, and then Seafoam loses the last of their mercantile wealth in the 18th century. What does that do? It fundamentally strips the McDucks of their nobility and their aristocratic status. They are forced to move to Glasgow and become working-class coal miners.
They hit rock bottom. The grand lords of the castle are now covered in soot.
And narratively, that is absolutely essential. You cannot have the ultimate 19th century American rags to riches story unless the characters actually start in rags. The writers completely dismantle the aristocratic legacy of the family to set the stage for the self-made billionaire trope.
And that transition into the 19th century gives us some of the most colorful characters in the whole lineage. You get Angus Pothole McDuck, born in 1829. He emigrates to the United States and becomes a Mississippi riverboat captain.
He's a wild character.
Yeah. He really is. He is the sole survivor when a steamboat called the Drennan White sinks. He gets his own boat, ends up co-owning a bankrupt southern plantation called Cornpone Gables, and then loses it all in a riverboat race where both ships sink to the bottom of the river.
He fails spectacularly over and over again. His life is a testament to stubborn persistence.
He does. He spends 10 years as a professional card player, wins another boat in a high-stakes poker game, hires a penniless inventor named Ratchet Gearloose, and finally just retires to New Orleans to write highly exaggerated dime novels about his own life called The Master of Mississippi.
He's the eccentric, larger-than-life uncle.
Exactly. But while Angus is out having these wild American adventures back in Scotland, we meet his brother Fergus McDuck and Fergus's wife, Downie O'Drake. And here's where it gets really interesting, because these two are the parents of the billionaire we all know.
Yes, the focus dramatically shifts from these grand, sweeping historical epics to a very intimate domestic setting. Fergus and Downie are working class, living in relative poverty in Glasgow, trying to raise a family.
And the lore around Fergus gives us the true origin story of the most famous prop in this entire mythology, the #1 dime. We always assume the young duck just earned it fairly as a kid, shining shoes on the streets of Glasgow. But the source material reveals that Fergus actually orchestrated the whole thing.
He set the whole thing up.
He did. Fergus secretly gave that specific American dime to a local ditch digger named Bert, and asked Bert to use it to pay his son for polishing his heavy work boots.
Now, this raises an important question, and it's perhaps the most profound psychological insight in the entire source document. Why did Fergus do that? Why use an American coin that wouldn't even spend in Scotland?
Right. It makes no sense on the surface.
But the document reveals that Fergus actually knew there was a massive ancient Knights Templar treasure buried deep underneath Castle McDuck. It had been hidden there centuries ago by an ancestor named Simon McDuck. Fergus knew exactly where it was, but he deliberately chose not to tell his son. He hid the existence of this unimaginable wealth. See, I look at that and think it's a stroke of brilliant parenting. He could have just handed his son a treasure map and solved all their problems instantly. Instead, he gave him that unspendable American dime to spark a sense of frustration, to make him realize that hard work doesn't always yield a fair reward unless you are sharp enough to protect yourself.
I actually have to push back on that.
Really?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it brilliant at all. I think it's an incredibly dangerous psychological gamble. He risked his son's entire emotional development on a theory. Fergus fundamentally believed that his son would be a stronger person if he built his fortune from the ground up, rather than inheriting a forgotten stash of gold.
True.
By giving him that American coin, he was explicitly pointing him away from his home and toward America, but at what cost? And I think that's a question we're posing to you, the listener. Have you ever valued an accomplishment or an object significantly more because you had to struggle and fight for it, rather than having it simply handed to you? Fergus clearly understood the psychology of self-reliance, but he weaponized it against his own child. That is a very fair point. It is brilliant, but deeply manipulative.
Yeah.
And while the son gets all the glory for going to America and building this colossal empire, we cannot ignore the women in this family. The sisters, Matilda and Hortense McDuck, are absolutely vital to the story.
They really are the backbone.
The document points out that from 1902 to 1930, while the famous billionaire was off traveling the globe, hunting treasures, and aggressively expanding his financial empire, it was actually Matilda and Hortense who were back in Duckburg, Calisota, running the entire business day to day.
They are the forgotten matriarchs of the empire. They provided the stability and the operational genius that allowed the global expansion to happen in the first place. Without them holding down the fort, the whole enterprise would have collapsed.
And they were formidable. Let's talk about Hortense, who was born in 1876. She is actually Donald Duck's mother, and she had a temper that makes her brother look absolutely calm by comparison. The text shares this incredible detail where Hortense single-handedly chases the entire United States military.
And sitting President Theodore Roosevelt.
Yes, off Kilmotor Hill. and she was armed with nothing but a broom and her own unrelenting rage. Just picture that for a second.
She was an absolute force of nature. But the story of the sisters also brings us to the tragic emotional core of this mythology. That same fiery passion that allowed Hortense to chase off a Rough Rider is also what fractures the family from within.
Yeah, the fallout was huge.
Despite all their shared history, despite the sisters faithfully running the empire for nearly 30 years, it all falls apart. The text notes that in 1930 there was a massive fight, a conflict so severe and deeply rooted in resentment that it ended all relationships between the billionaire brother and his family. The sisters left Duckburg and they were estranged for decades.
It completely grounds the fantasy. You have this character who has accumulated all the wealth in the world, built an empire, and can dive into a swimming pool filled with cash. But he ended up completely alone. He gained the whole world, but lost his family in the process.
It adds a deeply melancholic, very human layer to the billionaire myth. The writers are showing us the isolating nature of extreme wealth and obsession. It isn't just a fun story about getting rich, it's a cautionary tale about what getting rich ultimately costs you. The higher you climb, the more people you leave behind, until you are sitting alone in an empty mansion.
So what does this all mean? We started out looking at a dense Wikipedia article about a cartoon duck family. But what we found is a stunningly complex tapestry of world building. We traced a lineage from a Saxon siege in 946 through the corrupting nature of gluttony and cheapness, the humiliating loss of nobility in the 18th century, to the gritty, unforgiving self-reliance of the 19th century, and finally, the tragic isolation of the 20th century.
It shows the incredible power of collaborative storytelling over decades. You had writers like Karl Barks throwing out funny ideas just to meet a deadline, and then a writer like Don Rosa treating those ideas with the reverence of a serious historian. And through that process, they created something that is anchored by very real, universal human truths. Truth is about toxic family dynamics, the relentless ambition to succeed, and the incredibly heavy burden of inheritance.
It really is a masterpiece of modern mythology. And before we go, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought inspired by the source material. We talked a lot about the pattern of ruin among those ancient ancestors. Sir Roast eating himself to death, Swampole hoarding his wealth in the dark.
Right.
And we know Fergus McDuck deliberately hid the ancient knight's Templar treasure from his son to teach him a lesson in hard work. But what if Fergus hadn't done that? Imagine if a 10-year-old Scrooge had actually stumbled upon that massive, unimaginable Templar fortune buried right there under Castle McDuck.
Yeah.
Would the famous, adventurous billionaire we know even exist?
That's the real question.
Or would all that unearned instant wealth have triggered the family curse? Would he have just become another Sir Roast or Sir Swampole, corrupted by the gold, never leaving Scotland, and rotting away in a castle dungeon? I invite you to mull over how the obstacles we face and the shortcuts we are denied might actually be the very things that save us from our own worst instincts. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the surprisingly profound world of the Clan McDuck. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.